The river should have been my grave, but Thomas pulled me from those dark waters with hands that felt like destiny. For 3 months I believed in fairy tales again, until Banker Morrison spread those documents across his mahogany desk like tarot cards, revealing a future I never knew existed. Half of Millbrook belonged to me. The cowboy who saved my life had known all along. Every kiss had been a lie, every tender word a calculated investment. Subscribe now to discover how love can drown you deeper than any river ever could. The current grabbed my ankles like skeletal fingers, pulling me under the murky surface of Willow Creek. I had come to the river that September morning to wash away the grief of losing Papa, but the water seemed determined to claim me too. My heavy skirts became anchors, dragging me deeper into the cold embrace of death. The last thing I remembered before darkness claimed me was the taste of mud and the distant sound of hoofbeats thundering along the riverbank. When consciousness returned, I was coughing up river water onto the muddy shore, my lungs burning with each desperate breath. Above me stood a silhouette against the morning sun, a cowboy with gentle hands and eyes the color of storm clouds. Thomas Garrett introduced himself with a voice like warm honey, his calloused fingers brushing wet hair from my face with a tenderness that made my heart skip. He wrapped his coat around my shivering shoulders and helped me to my feet, his strong arm supporting my trembling frame. The way he looked at me in that moment, with such genuine concern and something deeper flickering in his gaze, made me forget about the river's attempt to claim my life. He insisted on riding me back to town, his horse moving at a gentle pace while I sat behind him, my arms wrapped around his waist. The warmth of his body against mine felt like coming home after years of wandering in the wilderness. I had never believed in love at first sight until that morning when death introduced me to the man who would steal my heart. For the next 3 months, Thomas courted me with a patience and devotion that felt like a miracle. He would appear at my boarding house every evening with wildflowers picked from the meadows outside town, his hat in his hands and that shy smile that made my knees weak. We would walk the dusty streets of Millbrook together, talking about everything and nothing, his deep voice painting pictures of a future that seemed too beautiful to be real. He told me stories of his life on the range, of cattle drives under star-filled skies and campfires that burned like beacons in the endless prairie darkness. His hands, rough from years of hard work, would hold mine with such gentle reverence that I felt like precious china in his care. Every moment with him felt stolen from fate itself, too perfect to last. The way Thomas kissed me under the old oak tree behind the church made me believe in forever again. His lips were soft against mine, tasting of coffee and promises, while his hands cradled my face like I was something sacred. He would whisper my name like a prayer, his breath warm against my ear as he told me how the river had brought us together for a reason. Those stolen moments in his arms made me forget about the loneliness that had consumed me since Papa's death, replacing it with a hope so bright it hurt to look at directly. He spoke of marriage in hushed tones, of a little house on the edge of town where we could build a life together. The future he painted with his words seemed so real I could almost touch it, could almost taste the happiness that waited just beyond tomorrow. But love built on lies has foundations made of sand, and even the strongest structures crumble when the truth comes calling. The morning Morrison summoned me to his bank, I thought it was about Papa's debts, about the small inheritance he had left behind. I never imagined that my world was about to shatter like glass thrown against stone, that the man I loved had been playing a game I didn't even know existed. The documents Morrison spread across his desk would reveal a truth so devastating that I would wish the river had claimed me after all. Thomas Garrett, the cowboy who saved my life, had known exactly who I was from the moment he pulled me from those dark waters. Morrison's office smelled of leather and secrets, the heavy curtains blocking out the morning sun like they were hiding something shameful from the light. The banker's face was grave as he gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his massive desk. his fingers drumming nervously against the polished wood. I smoothed my best dress and tried to calm the flutter of anxiety in my chest, assuming this meeting was about settling Papa's final affairs. The stack of documents before Morrison looked official and intimidating, bound with red ribbon like a gift that no one wanted to receive. His eyes held a mixture of pity and something else I couldn't quite identify, something that made my skin crawl with unease. When he finally spoke, his words would shatter the carefully constructed world I had been living in for the past 3 months. The first document Morrison unfolded was a deed, yellowed with age and bearing Papa's signature in his familiar scrawling hand. As he read the legal language aloud, my mind struggled to process the impossible words flowing from his lips like poison honey. According to the papers, Papa had owned vast tracts of land throughout Millbrook, properties I had never known existed. The general store, the hotel, half the residential lots in town, even shares in the silver mine that employed most of the local men. My father, who I had believed died with nothing but debts and regrets, had actually been one of the wealthiest men in the territory. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and making the room spin around me like a child's top. Morrison's voice continued its relentless recitation of my inheritance, each property and asset adding another layer to the crushing weight of this new reality. The boarding house where I had been living as a paying guest actually belonged to me, along with the restaurant where I had been working to pay for my room and board. The irony was so bitter I could taste it on my tongue like copper pennies. I'd been scrubbing floors and serving meals in establishments that I owned, living like a pauper while sitting on a fortune that could have bought half the state. Papa had hidden this wealth from me so completely that I had grieved his death while worrying about how to pay for his funeral. The man I thought I knew had been a stranger wearing my father's face, keeping secrets that would have changed everything. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come, hidden in the final document that Morrison handled like it contained dynamite. A letter in Papa's handwriting, dated just days before his death, explaining why he had kept my inheritance secret. He had wanted me to find love for myself, not for my money, to know that any man who courted me did so for genuine affection rather than financial gain. The letter spoke of his fear that wealth would make me a target for fortune hunters, that I would never know if love was real or manufactured. His intentions had been protective, born from a father's desire to shield his daughter from the predators that circled wealthy women like vultures around carrion, but his well-meaning deception had created the very situation he had tried to prevent. The final paragraph of Papa's letter mentioned Thomas Garrett by name, describing him as the son of Papa's former business partner and someone who had been aware of my true circumstances from the beginning. The words on the page blurred as tears filled my eyes, each sentence driving another nail into the coffin of my naive happiness. Thomas had known who I was when he pulled me from the river, had known about my inheritance when he brought me wildflowers and whispered sweet promises under the starlight. Every kiss, every tender word, every moment of what I had believed was genuine affection had been tainted by his knowledge of my wealth. The cowboy who had saved my life had been playing a long game, and I had been too blinded by love to see the truth staring me in the face. Morrison's voice faded to a distant murmur as the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me like an avalanche. I was one of the richest women in the territory, but I had never felt poorer in my entire life. The love I had treasured like a precious jewel had been revealed as fool's gold, beautiful on the surface but worthless underneath. Thomas Garrett had not rescued me from drowning. He had simply chosen a different way to destroy me, one that would leave me breathing but wishing I wasn't. The papers scattered across Morrison's desk represented more than just property and wealth. They were the evidence of my own foolishness, proof that I had been living in a fairy tale while the real world plotted around me like wolves in the darkness. I found Thomas at our usual meeting place beneath the old oak tree. his silhouette dark against the star-scattered sky like a shadow of the man I thought I loved. He was waiting for me with that familiar smile, a bouquet of prairie roses in his weathered hands, completely unaware that my world had crumbled to ash just hours before. The sight of him standing there so casually, so innocently, made rage burn in my chest like wildfire consuming dry grass. How dare he continue this charade when I now knew the truth about his motivations, when every gesture of affection had been revealed as calculated manipulation. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair and made his eyes gleam like a predator's in the darkness, and I wondered how I had ever mistaken his hunting for love. When I stepped into the clearing, Thomas turned toward me with that warm smile that had once made my heart race with joy. But tonight, that same expression filled me with a cold fury that surprised me with its intensity. He moved to embrace me as he always did, his arms reaching out to pull me close, but I stepped back like he was carrying some contagious disease. The confusion that flickered across his handsome features would have been amusing if my heart wasn't breaking into 1,000 pieces. He asked what was wrong, his voice soft with concern that now sounded hollow and false to my ears. The roses in his hands suddenly looked like funeral flowers, appropriate for mourning the death of everything I had believed about us. I pulled Morrison's documents from my reticule and held them up like evidence in a trial, watching as recognition dawned in Thomas's storm-grey eyes. The colour drained from his face faster than water from a broken dam, and his mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air on dry land. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. The papers rustled in the evening breeze, their legal language whispering secrets that had been hidden for too long. Thomas dropped the roses, and they scattered across the ground like drops of blood, their petals already beginning to wilt in the cool night air. The man, who had always been so confident, so sure of himself, suddenly looked like a boy caught stealing candy from the general store. His attempts at explanation came tumbling out in a rush of words that sounded desperate and hollow. Thomas claimed he had fallen in love with me despite knowing about my inheritance, that his feelings had grown genuine over the months we had spent together. He swore that the money meant nothing to him, that he would have loved me just as deeply if I had been the penniless orphan I believed myself to be. But his words rang false in the night air, each protestation of innocence only serving to deepen my sense of betrayal. How could I believe anything he said when our entire relationship had been built on a foundation of lies and deception? The man standing before me was a stranger wearing the face of my beloved, and I realized I had never truly known him at all. The worst part was the way he reached for me, his hands seeking to touch my face with the same tenderness he had shown that first day by the river. But now his touch felt like a violation, like the caress of a snake that had been hiding its fangs behind gentle kisses. I jerked away from his reaching fingers, my skin crawling with the memory of all the times I had welcomed his embrace. Thomas's eyes filled with tears that might have been genuine, but I could no longer trust my ability to distinguish between real emotion and masterful performance. He begged me to listen, to give him a chance to explain, to believe that his love for me had transcended whatever mercenary motives had brought us together. But trust, once shattered, cannot be reassembled like a broken vase. The cracks will always show, and the vessel will never hold water the same way again. I told him that our engagement was over, that I never wanted to see him again, that he should consider himself fortunate I wasn't having him arrested for fraud. The words came out colder than I intended, but the ice in my voice was the only thing keeping me from collapsing into sobs right there beneath our tree. Thomas looked like I had struck him across the face, his strong shoulders sagging under the weight of my rejection. He tried once more to reach for me, to bridge the gap that had opened between us, but I was already walking away. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, his voice breaking like a boy's, but I didn't turn around. The woman who had believed in fairy tales was dead, drowned in the same river where this nightmare had begun, and the person walking away was someone harder, colder, and infinitely more alone. I didn't go home immediately after leaving the lawyer's office. Instead, I walked the streets of Millbrook with new eyes, seeing my inheritance everywhere I looked. The bakery where Jake had bought me sweet rolls on Sunday mornings belonged to me. The dress shop where I had admired the blue silk in the window was mine. Even the boarding house where I had been paying rent was property I owned without knowing it. Every building, every business, every corner of this town that had become precious to me because of Jake was actually mine by right of birth and blood, and my father's hidden legacy. The weight of wealth felt heavier than I had ever imagined it could. People nodded to me on the street with a deference I had attributed to small-town politeness, but now I understood it was the respect accorded to money and power. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house had been treating me like a favored guest rather than a paying customer, and now I knew why. The entire town had been watching me, waiting to see what I would do with my inheritance, while I remained blissfully ignorant of my own circumstances. But it was the thought of Jake that made my chest feel like it was caving in on itself. Had he known from the beginning? Had he been watching me struggle with the river current, waiting for the perfect moment to play the hero? The timing seemed too convenient now, too perfectly orchestrated to be mere chance. A wealthy heiress arrives in town, nearly drowns, and is rescued by a charming cowboy who proceeds to sweep her off her feet. It read like a dime novel plot, and I had been naive enough to believe it was real love. I found myself standing outside the saloon where Jake sometimes went for a drink after our evening walks. Through the batwing doors, I could hear men's voices, laughter, the clink of glasses and coins. Part of me wanted to march inside and confront him immediately, to demand the truth about his motivations and his feelings. But another part of me, the part that was still desperately in love despite everything, wanted to give him a chance to explain. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe I was wrong about his deception. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our courtship, with this new knowledge coloring my memories. The way he had appeared so quickly at the river, as if he had been watching. The questions about my family that had seemed like natural curiosity, but now felt like fishing for information. The careful way he had courted me, never pushing too hard, never demanding too much, as if he were following some predetermined plan. Even his kisses, which had felt so spontaneous and passionate, now seemed calculated to keep me interested without compromising my virtue. By morning, I had made my decision. I would confront Jake Morrison directly, give him the opportunity to tell me the truth about what he knew and when he knew it. If he had been honest with me from the beginning, if he had fallen in love with me despite knowing about my inheritance, then perhaps we could find a way forward together. But if he had been playing a long game, using my loneliness and gratitude to secure access to my fortune, then I would have to find the strength to walk away from the only man I had ever truly loved. The thought of losing him felt like dying, but the thought of being loved for my money rather than myself felt even worse. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing the simple blue dress he had always admired, and prepared to discover whether the man who had saved my life had also been planning to destroy it. I found Jake at his ranch just after sunrise, working with a young stallion in the corral behind his modest house. He looked up when he heard my approach, and his face lit up with the smile that had been melting my heart for months. "Elizabeth!" he called out, dropping the lead rope and walking toward me with that easy, confident stride that had always made my pulse quicken. "You're up early, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" The endearment that had once made me feel cherished now felt like another lie, another carefully chosen word designed to keep me under his spell. I didn't return his smile, didn't move into his arms when he reached for me. Instead, I stood perfectly still and watched his expression change as he registered my mood. "We need to talk, Jake," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "About my father's inheritance, about what you knew and when you knew it, about whether anything between us has been real." His face went pale beneath his tan, and I saw the exact moment when he realized that his carefully constructed deception had finally crumbled. The guilt I had glimpsed in fleeting moments was now written clearly across his features. He tried to explain, stumbling over words that came too late to matter. He had known about my inheritance from the beginning, he admitted, had been watching for my arrival because the whole town had been curious about the mysterious heiress. But he swore that his feelings for me were real, that what had started as curiosity had become genuine love. The rescue at the river had been pure chance, he insisted, though he couldn't deny that he had used the opportunity to get close to me. Every word he spoke felt like another betrayal, another confirmation that the man I loved had never really existed. I listened to his explanations, his apologies, his desperate attempts to convince me that his love was authentic, despite the deception that had birthed it. But how could I believe him now? How could I trust any emotion from a man who had been lying to me for months? When he reached for my hands, I stepped back, and I saw something die in his eyes. "Elizabeth, please," he whispered, and my name on his lips no longer sounded like a prayer, but like a plea from a drowning man. "I love you. That has to count for something. But love built on lies is not love at all. It's manipulation dressed in prettier clothes." I told him that I couldn't distinguish between his genuine feelings and his calculated actions, that I would never be able to trust him again. The pain in his eyes looked real, but then again, everything about him had looked real until today. I turned to walk away and he called after me, his voice breaking on my name. I didn't look back, though every step away from him felt like tearing pieces of my own heart out and leaving them scattered in the dust. As I rode back to town, I realized that I was truly alone now, in a way I had never been before. The inheritance that should have been a blessing felt like a curse. The wealth that should have brought security had instead brought betrayal. I owned half of Millbrook, but I had lost the only thing that had ever made me feel at home there. The cowboy who had saved me from drowning had instead taught me that sometimes the most dangerous currents are the ones that look like rescue, and that the deepest wounds are inflicted by the hands we trust to heal us.